Hello, my name is Ellie, and I've decided to talk about something that we use in our everyday lives, which is our phones. So, I will be talking about the evolution of the telephone. How did people communicate before telephones? People would communicate through using telegraphs, which is where they would transmit and receive messages over long distances using Morse code. They would also write letters, but this was a less effective way to communicate because it often took several weeks to send and receive letters. People would often receive big news or learn of big events through reading the newspapers, but the most effective way to know that your message came across and was received to somebody is through face-to-face interaction. Who invented the first telephone? A few influencers for the telephone were Antonio Meucci, Charles Brissell, and Alexander Graham Bell. In 1849, Meucci invented the telephone but never received recognition for it due to economic reasons and because of his incapability of speaking English. In 1854, Brissell created a microphone which could change speech into electrical signals. And in 1876, Anthony Graham Bell won the first U.S. patent for the device, which meant he owned the legal rights to inventing the telephone. All of these people can be argued to know who really invented the telephone, but you can only decide for yourself through either looking at the dates or going through who owns the legal rights. What is the difference between the telegraph and the telephone? The telegraph is the first electrical communication system. How does it work? It's a switch on an electrical circuit which turns an electrical current on or off. The on or off of the electrical current is seen by others as dots and dashes, also known as Morse code. The telephone is the instrument designed to transmit and receive human voices as messages. The telegraph uses Morse code to communicate, while the telephone uses verbal communication to communicate. How did the first telephone operate? HowItWorksDaily.com describes the operations of the first telephone invented by Alexander Graham Bell as it worked by converting sound into an electrical signal via a liquid transmitter. This process centered around directing sound through a receiver and onto a thin membrane stretched over a drum. A simple explanation of how the telephone worked in the 1800s is through the example of the cans and the string. One person will talk in one side of the can, and the other person will receive vibrations through the string, and once they receive the vibrations, this is how they will be able to hear what the other person is saying. How did the first telephone transmit messages versus phones transmitting messages now? In the 1800s, the first telephone used sound waves which created vibrations. The telephones which use sound waves had to be connected through a wire or a line, or else the message will not be transmitted or heard. Now, telephones are used messages are received through radio waves, which travel in the air at the speed of light. The radio waves are sent to and received by the closest cell tower, which will then be where the data is transferred, and it will transfer to a cell tower closest to the message recipient. How did the idea of the telephone appear? Thomas Watson, one of Bell's assistants, was trying to reactivate a telephone transmitter. After hearing a sound, Bell thought that he could somehow figure out how to send a human's voice through a wire. Within 5 days, he went from transmitting a single current to transmitting an actual speech. To test his new discovery, Bell and Watson went into separate rooms, and Bell spoke into one side of the telephone and said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you." Some significant events of the telephone include in 1876, which is when it was first invented. Then, in 1927, the first rotary dial handset was invented. Following that, in 1963, the invention of the dial pad telephone came. And in 1973, the first mobile phone was created. In 1999, the first phones, which included internet, were created. And in 2007, the first iPhone came out. Some other milestones for the telephone were in 1877, the first commercial for the telephone came out. In 1880, the first telephone numbers existed. In 1965, the first cordless phones. In 1982, mobile phones became available to the public. In 1983, the first advancement to mobile phones came. In 1986, the first flip phone came out. In 1992, first smartphone came out. In 1993, texting is permitted. And in 2000, over 100 million mobile phones are sold and or owned. How has our communication style changed? In the 1800s, you would first see face-to-face interaction, followed by letters and the telegraph, which is where you would use Morse code. Now, you see social media, emails, chats, calls, texts, and lastly, face-to-face interaction. Through the 1800s and before, interaction face-to-face was the most important and easiest way to communicate, but now we have come up with more convenient ways to communicate, such as the chats, texts, and everything else. How has today's technology of phones impacted us? It's impacted us through convenience. In the 1800s, you would have to wait several weeks to receive a message, but now you can receive a message within a matter of seconds. And at the beginning of the 1800s, you would have to either be at home or at work to use the telephone, but now most people have one in the back of their pockets, which you can use at any time. It also impacted us through distance. When the telephone first came out, distance was limited because the telephones had to be connected in order for the message to be received. Now, we can talk to somebody on the other side of the world and the message is clearly received. How have telephones altered our communication skills? We may see modern phones and its capabilities as being a great blessing, but how much of a blessing is it really? Of course, they are more convenient and more effective for the modern phone, but it limits our face-to-face interaction. It helps us misinterpret the message, which is more easily interpreted after being presented face-to-face. And it also helps us lose our way of speaking in a specific way because we become more casual and use slang when we should be using more formal words. More than a telephone? The first telephone only had technology to transmit and receive messages. Phones now have games, tools, media, and information. Think of our phones as being used as everyday uses back then, but all captured in one item at the hold of our fingertips constantly. What does the future of telephones look like? Some improvements that may come include holographic displays, flexible frames, becoming more eco-friendly, and educational tools. Here is my works cited page. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. I'm just wondering, as you did your research, did you find that the dimensions of the phones changed over time? What have the dimensions changed to?
The first mobile phone was a 2.5-pound brick that was very large, but it has since become smaller, more lightweight, containing more features, and is touchscreen. Thank you.